I used to think I had myself figured out. I went from being this skinny, insecure gamer to pursuing my dreams in fitness and as a YouTuber, but all it took was one fateful day in 2020 for me to realize I didn't know shit. I just moved to a big city to chase my dreams, I had a new job, everything seemed to be looking up, but then COVID happened, and all the gyms closed, and my boss cut my hours into single digits. But I thought, it's only gonna be a week or so, no big deal. The new Call of Duty Warzone just dropped, so I'm gonna play that with my friends, and things will get back to normal soon. But they didn't. As the weeks went by, I went back into my old Coomer gamer mode, re-downloading all my old games, revisiting all my old naughty sites, and I grew depressed and confused. The two things that defined me, fitness and making videos about it, were stripped from me. And suddenly I realized I have no idea who I am. I even remember literally Googling, I don't know who I am, and that quickly led me to the realization that I was experiencing an identity crisis. I completely lost my passion for life itself. I just became this empty goblin who hung out in his room all day, distracting himself from the existential crisis he was facing. Eventually, everything opened back up. I could work out again, I could work again, I could make videos again, but things were different. I was changed. I now knew that I had a task to discover my authentic self. Fast forward 4 years, I now have high levels of confidence, self-assurance, and I wake up every day with this immense sense of purpose and drive for life, and everything has just done a complete 180. I would be lying if I said it wasn't a grueling process of self-discovery to get me here. So, in this video, I will be breaking down everything I did so you can just take what works and copy me so you don't have to struggle for years and years and years like I did. Starting with the first step that is a requirement for self-discovery: isolation. Because shortly after I came out of lockdown, I moved in with my girlfriend, but she had school and a job, and eventually I began working for myself as a freelancer at home, so I had a lot of time by myself. So I began creating space in my days where I could just observe my thoughts in my own mind. And as someone who constantly stimulated himself with podcasts, YouTube videos, whatever, it was kind of hard, especially when you first start, because you realize, oh, there's a lot of issues going on and I don't want to face them. But quickly I began to notice a benefit of isolation, and that is because you separate yourself from the collective unconscious. This is the part of our psyche that's connected to everyone else, especially those around us, and it's often results in herd mentality. We listen to certain music because it's what our friends like. We go and do certain activities because it's what our friends do, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but if you want to figure out who you really are, you need to separate yourself from all of these social constraints that would keep you in a box, because as humans, we are designed to be social. We strongly desire to be liked, and that often results in us morphing ourselves or hiding certain parts of ourselves to please those around us. Next, I began to notice that my mind was this storm of constant thoughts, some of them positive, but a lot of them negative, a lot of them straight up sabotaging me in my personal life. In fact, there was one day where I felt so overwhelmed mentally that I remember just laying on my back, staring at the ceiling for over an hour straight, and just observing everything that popped to my mind, trying to find the source. And I realized there was no source. Things were just appearing. This is also when I began taking meditation very seriously, because it increases your ability to observe these thoughts and not identify with them. Now, you need to meditate a specific way for this, because there's different ways to meditate. But the way you want to meditate is for metacognition or mindfulness. And if you're interested in meditating the exact same way I do, I have a free 5-day series you can check out in the description. And the more you do this, the more you'll be able to observe your mind from this pulled back perspective, and then you pair it with journaling, because the mind is a jumbled mess, and often we don't even think in full sentences. It's just fragments of ideas and thoughts and images. But when you journal, you are forced to organize these things so you can actually observe them objectively. But look, I know when a lot of people hear meditation or journaling, they think, oh, that's basic or wooey or whatever, I don't really need to do that. But look, until you develop the skill, because it is a skill, a mental muscle that you build to observe thoughts without identifying with them, how are you going to realize who you are? You're just going to be a victim to every thought that pops in your head. But finally, when you're in the isolation phase, you need to begin to remove things that give you a false sense of identity or purpose, or even those that just distract you. I realized that I had a massive problem when I was playing Call of Duty Mobile pretty much every single day. Wow. Since my brain wanted this cheap source of dopamine, it would cope and say things like, oh no, you actually like playing this game, you could just start making YouTube videos about it on another channel, then it's productive and you can keep doing it. For you, this might also be video games, but it could also be YouTubers, podcasts. I know for many it will be sports, keeping up with sports teams, watching sports games all the time, or even the job you work, because some people have jobs with like decent status or decent titles in their corporations or whatever, and your ego wants to identify with that, so you just begin to think about that all day. Maybe even you take your work home and distract yourself with it for the rest of the day. But speaking of ego, that leads us into step 2, ego separation. I've come to realize that even in our own world of self-improvement, a lot of us are using self-improvement as just a means to an end, and that end is typically shallow desires of materialism, of social success, of getting certain girls, and all of that is just to please the ego. And I was no exception. I eventually came to realize that a lot of the reasons I did the things I do in regards to fitness and personal development was not for me, it was for others. And the thing is about the ego is that by itself, it's pretty neutral. It's not bad. There's a reason it's part of our psyche. It's just that in the modern world, it gets hijacked and it quickly becomes one of our own worst enemies. In the words of Jordan Peterson, pride in who you are stops you from becoming who you can be. So while the ego may be this useful tool we can use, especially when we're trying to advance in social and professional settings, it will also act as an artificial ceiling that will not let you progress into these higher versions of yourself. So the solution isn't ego death that a lot of spiritual woo-wee type people like to say, rather it is gaining control of the ego. And in order to do that, you first have to almost beat it to death, near death. So luckily, if you started meditating already, you're already working on whittling down the ego because you're learning to detach from the thoughts, and a lot of times the thoughts fed to us are from the ego. But a step further would be questioning every single desire you have. For example, a couple years ago, I had a strong desire to have a expensive designer bag, and my ego would cope and say things like, oh no, I want it so I can put more stuff in it, I can put a little camera in there, help me get content. But the truth of the matter is, I just wanted that logo, that design, to show other people, oh, look at me, I can afford this expensive bag, I'm worthy of being respected and loved. And that could have been prevented if I would have acknowledged this desire and asked why about 5 times. For example, if you desire a new sports car and you ask yourself why, and you say, well, because it's cool, it looks cool. And then you ask yourself, why do you want a car that looks cool? And you get an answer like, well, because then girls will like me more. You quickly realize that desire is very shallow, compared to when you ask why 3, 4, 5 times and you end up with the conclusion of, I genuinely like cars. I feel happy with the experience of driving this car, even if no one else is around to see me in it. Suddenly, that desire is actually pretty valid, and you can strive for those things. But there is also a part of you that your ego has been hiding from yourself and from others for the entirety of your life. This part of you is called the shadow. And while it does sound spooky, this isn't evil parts of yourself. It's just parts of yourself that you've unconsciously repressed for years and years and years. But these parts of yourself, while hidden, are still parts of yourself. And if you do not bring them into light, you will always have a missing piece of your authentic self. This happened with me growing up, addicted to things like pornography, having insecurity around girls. I began to repress a lot of sexual aspects of myself. But this resulted in me being a less masculine, a less driven, a less overall potent version of myself. And it wasn't until I faced my shadow. And when you face the shadow, when you put the light on it, a lot of the negative aspects just shed. And then you can implement the positive aspects into your life and you're essentially reborn. But there is a part of this that involves accepting your flaws. And I'm not talking about the typical, oh, love yourself for who you are, accept your flaws, mumbo jumbo that a lot of self-help gurus talk about. I'm talking about bringing your flaws that you try to hide from yourself, that your ego hides from you, into light so you know the things you need to work on so that you can work on becoming your better, more authentic self. But I actually had done something before embarking on this journey that was actually step 3 all along: environmental change. So much of what we think we are is nothing more than programming from those around us or the habits triggered by the environment that we're constantly in. I realized this whenever I would go back home for a week or so for holidays and things like that, and I would notice myself instantly fall back into old habits and old thinking patterns because I was in my old environment that I was in during high school. And of course, you can do this on a larger scale once you become of age. You can leave your parents' house, you can leave your hometown, you could even leave your state or your country. For a lot of you who can't do that right now, there is still no excuse to do this on a smaller scale. For example, just purging your room or your home. If there are remnants of distraction of this past self that you're not happy with, for example, an Xbox plugged into the TV that the moment you get home, you quickly turn it on and start playing a game, get rid of it. If it's old posters on your walls, if it's some of the clothes in your closet, there's nothing stopping you from saying, these things are not me anymore, therefore I'm going to remove them from the environment so they cannot trigger me into old habits or thought patterns. And I'm not talking about just physical environments, but your digital environments as well. If the moment you open your laptop, you're in Discord with all your old gaming buddies and that's not someone you want to be anymore, you need to delete Discord. You need to leave those servers. If it's social media echo chambers that keep repeating the same political arguments, social arguments, things that you've just been programmed to believe, just leave that for a while. Isolate yourself from all of these influences so you can see what organically arrives. Maybe some of those things you will re-implement in the future, but right now we cannot afford to leave that in the equation. But one of the biggest reasons why the majority of people won't discover who they really are is because we've been trained to avoid suffering of any kind. When in reality, you need to embrace suffering and sacrifice. Psychologist Carl Jung had the idea that there are two types of suffering. The first type is meaningless suffering. This is the suffering we endure when we're actively trying to avoid pain from the problems we currently face, even within ourselves. And this leads to the majority of emotional problems and neuroticism. Compared to the second type, meaningful suffering. This is when we decide to face our pains head on. For example, I used to be really skinny. I was trying to bulk up. I was working out for hours and hours a day, but the scale wasn't moving. I wasn't getting any stronger and my physique wasn't changing. I still looked small and that led to a lot of insecurity. That led to a lot of frustration with the very thing I love, working out. But that's because I was ignoring the pain I had to face of eating enough food to actually gain weight, build muscle, and bulk up. But I was just trying to avoid the discomfort of having to eat a lot of food, and it wasn't until I faced that pain head on that I began growing more. And yeah, it was some force feeding at times. Yeah, it kind of sucked having to fit all this protein and calories into my daily life, but it was infinitely better for me overall because I continued making progression. I was learning a lot of lessons throughout the way than if I just kept pushing this problem to the side. An easy way to think about this is just any uncomfortable thing that you're avoiding, but deep down you know you should do, you should just do it. Turn that meaningless suffering into meaningful suffering that will make you better, that will unlock this higher version of yourself. Because often I find when I endure suffering, when I endure sacrifice for longer periods of time in regards to my professional life, my personal life with relationships, and even just fitness, it resulted in me becoming stronger. It taught me important life lessons. It made me appreciate the things I earned more. But most importantly, it helped me understand myself, because when you are in the trenches, when you are suffering, when you're on the 3rd mile of the 5-mile run and you're really thinking about quitting and you're suffering and your legs hurt and your head's giving you every reason to stop, that is when you truly figure out who the fuck you are. As Nietzsche said, the discipline of suffering, of great suffering. Do you not know that only this discipline has created all enhancements of man so far? This next one might surprise you, but consider taking personality tests, but don't do it the way the majority of people do it. The majority of people take some personality tests, they get the results back, like, oh my gosh, this is literally me, and then they live in those constraints for the rest of their lives because they're treating it as a diagnosis. You are this way, that's just how it is. When in reality, you're supposed to see it as, oh, these are the current levels of certain traits that I have. Take these tests, get these results, and then use these results to raise your self-awareness. Not only for your strengths, things that you should lean into and almost exploit to get better results out of life, but also your weaknesses. Last year, I took this 16 personalities test and I got architect, INTJA. And it made me realize that 1, I work better by myself. I work better when I'm isolated at my desk. I can just fully focus on this and I'm not collaborating with anyone. But 2, I am overly independent and I need to learn how to open myself up more and collaborate with others at certain times. The big 3 personality tests that I've had experience with and would actually recommend would be 16 personalities, the Enneagram, and funny enough, Tai Lopez's Life Compass test. When you take these and get the results, see it as you're a video game character and you're seeing certain levels. Now, obviously, if you have a certain archetype, for example, a wizard is going to be better at magic than a warrior, but that doesn't mean that the wizard can't level up his swordsmanship so that he can be more well-rounded. But look, this next one, a lot of people are going to click off. And I was debating even putting it in, but it would be dishonest if I didn't put this one in. And that would be connecting to God. The nihilist believes that there is no built-in purpose to life. They think things like religion, morality, social rules, finding meaning is all made up. It's all fairy tale nonsense. There really is no reason to do anything. And this leads to either things like depression, existentialism, or going more narcissistic, seeing yourself as the God. You do everything to serve yourself. I believe that there is a creator. I believe that there is a super consciousness that supersedes even our own personal consciousness. When you look at a phone, you know that it had a designer. It's simply too complex, too purposeful to have just spawned into this world without someone creating it. Now look at things like the human eye, the human brain, DNA, consciousness itself. If something much more simpler than any of that, like a phone, needs a designer, why would we not? But once you're able to connect to God, you instantly get this new sense of morality, of empathy, of love for others, and a sense of purpose that honestly goes deeper than anything we could selfishly desire. But finally, real quick, let's talk about purpose. People, especially in the self-improvement world, are obsessed with having a purpose, even if it's prescribed to them by someone else. That's why you see so many self-improvement gurus telling you exactly what you should strive for, exactly what you should achieve, and most of the time they sell you something to help you along the way. But if you're not sure what exactly your purpose is, instead of stressing about that, trying to find this purpose, you actually need to prioritize knowing your authentic self, because then that allows the purpose to surface. That kind of rhymed. Therefore, if you feel like you lack purpose right now, make the process of self-discovery the purpose. And on a more shallow level, such as career path, hobbies, things like that, what things do you enjoy for the sake of doing them, not for the outcome? For example, I've been making videos since I was 12 years old, well before I knew about the potential of creating a career, making money, things like that, because I just loved the act of doing it itself. That's why I've been able to persist for so long, even through phases of quote unquote suffering when the results weren't coming. But finally, you need to understand that this is an infinite game. Ideally, there is always going to be a higher version of yourself that you are consistently moving towards, and when you get there, a new higher self reveals itself. So while everything I've talked about is going to help immensely, it's going to drastically change your life, it's going to unlock all the benefits I talked about, there is no finish line. The finish line just keeps moving forward. The purpose is actually playing the game itself. But this is the best game we could possibly play. As Nietzsche said, no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. But if you want to know my exact protocol I use to work towards that higher version of myself and essentially reprogram my mind for success, click the video on the screen right now. And if you're interested in my full self-development guide that I've used to reprogram the subconscious mind for things like eliminate your insecurities, destructive habits, become more confident, more stoic, more focused, you can check out Mental Mastery in the description below. Thank you for watching. Hope you learned something. Bye-bye.